What's up, Whisper Nation? It's June 2nd, and we're doing another show for you. We've got an exciting breakdown today happening. We're talking about that AFC West division. So we're talking about, Pat Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. We're going to be talking about the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to be talking about the Chargers, and we're going to be talking about the one and only Travis. You're a little afraid of this team because of what the implications could be. That's the Denver Broncos. That's all going down right here on the Fantasy Whisperers.
Right here.
What's up, Whisper Nation? Yeah, Johnny's trying to get me scared, but if you're scared, go to church. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Get us with a like, comment below what your favorite player in the AFC West is going to be this year, and just help us grow this channel. We appreciate you guys more than ever, and we're just trying to keep on with this. If you're new to the Fantasy Whispers, make sure you follow on all of our social media platforms. We put out fantasy football content daily, Monday through Friday. And so we are rocking and rolling into this offseason. Memorial Day is now behind us, which means we get to rock and roll. Mock Draft Mania is over, and we're rocking through some of our team by team fantasy relevant, breakdowns, Johnny. We're going to talk about the AFC West next. But before we get into that, before we get into that meat and potatoes, like we always do, I want to talk a little bit about Keep Trade Cut. We've been doing this on our divisional shows, and I want to ask you a scenario here because we're going to talk AFC West. And there's three really awesome tight ends, and they all differ in strategy kind of with how you're going to attack the tight end position, right? So you have Travis Kelsey, you have Darren Waller, and you've got Noah Fant. So if you're thinking tight end early, lock up Kelsey, grab him early. That's what you're going to have to do to get Kelsey. You're thinking middle rounds, maybe you can sneak in Darren Waller, who's a PPR monster. Maybe he hits that top tier this year because God knows he's getting close. And then you've got Noah Fant, who's the breakout guy. We saw little flashes of it last year, but just couldn't stay healthy. So we're going to do a little keep, trade, cut, Johnny. You're going to keep one, trade one, cut the other one. Noah Fant, Darren Waller, and Travis Kelsey. Go.
Well, Travis, you stole my thunder because normally I do the warm up question.
Yeah,
but you're like no.
Usually you don't tell me until right before the show it's going to happen. So guess what? It's your turn.
Unbelievable. So with this keep trade cut, I like it because all three of these tight ends are going to be talked about a lot this offseason. And so for me, I do think Noah Fant is intriguing as far as a late round dart throw, but I'm sorry, I'm cutting him because he doesn't have as much fantasy value as some of these other players right now. Now, if Aaron Rodgers goes there, I might regret cutting him at this certain point in time. But with the information I know right now, I would cut Noah Fant. I am going to trade away. This might shock some people, but I'm going to trade away Travis Kelsey because I think I could get a good amount of value for him. Even if you're talking redraft, he's going up there as far as draft capital. And then if you're talking about dynasty, sure, it's a little bit down, but Travis Kelsey, tight ends play late into their 30s, and he's tied to Pat Mahomes. So in that case, I would trade him away. And then I'm keeping Darren Waller. We're going to talk about him today, but I'm just going to let you know how excited I am for Darren Waller. I'll give you a little sneak peek. This guy is just outright unbelievable. I still think, even though he's going as a tight end 3 off the board, Travis, I still think he's super underrated, and people don't really realize what he is actually doing and how good he is and how much he's affecting fantasy rosters. And so for that reason, I'm keeping him. I'm going to keep him in my, stash, my bag. And then, and I'm going to have him play this year, and he's going to ball out. Sneak preview of what's coming up later, but I'm just going to let you know he's going to ball out again, and there's a good chance he is the tight end number 1 next year.
If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and comment if you agree or not with Johnny, what your keep trade cut would be with these 3 tight ends. And if you're listening on the audio version, get on over to YouTube and subscribe today. We got great videos over there, so we'd love to have you as part of that community. as well. So yeah, you broke it down pretty well. I would tend to agree with you. I think you get more trade capital when you trade away Kelsey. That's just a bigger name. And then you keep a guy who's basically giving you Kelsey-esque production. Now, nobody's doing it like Kelsey right now, but if you're going to take that little bit of a hit at the positional advantage, might as well have somebody who's going to give you a positional advantage more often than not in a guy in Darren Waller. So I definitely love how you broke it down there. So I'm excited to get into these guys and more in this AFC West breakdown. But first, Johnny, we got some big news. It's about that time of year again. Whisper Nation, the Fantasy Whispers draft kit is launching soon. It's going to be better than ever this year. You know our draft kit. It's fully loaded with premium player projections and rankings, consistency charts, and over 3 years worth of data, cheat sheets, strength of schedule charts, and so much more. The TFW draft kit will be on sale July 1st for $15. That's an industry low price. And then you're getting so much from that. But if you pre-order starting June 1st, which means you're ready, you can go do that right now. You'll get it for the incredible price of only $10. Head on over to thefantasywhispers.com to get your kit today. The pre-sale is officially on, Johnny. Super stoked on that. Going to be a good.
Already bought myself a kit, dude. Already bought one.
You paid double. That's how I roll around here.
So it's worth it. It's worth it.
It is worth it.
And the value of the information inside, definitely.
And, we're just changing it up each and every year, trying to make it, just easier on the eyes, easier to digest. We're excited, Whisper Nation, for you guys to get in there and mess with that draft kit. You probably already saw the email. Get over there now. You got a month to do it. If you're gonna be in on $15 for it, which is still worth it. But get $5 off. Go over to the site now. Do it. Yeah. Do what I say. All right, we're going to talk AFC West.
Do as I say, not as
I do. Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk Denver Broncos, Johnny, and we're going to work through this team. This is a kind of a team that is an enigma. We obviously know the quarterback situation with Drew Lock has been up and down. Teddy Bridgewater was brought to down. I do believe that they want Drew Lock to be the guy. Now, I think they are in the market to try and maybe go get Aaron Rodgers if he becomes available. But let me just say right now, Green Bay has now made it very clear they still are in no want to trade Aaron Rodgers. So let's talk Drew Lock a little bit. What I thought was really interesting is we're seeing a lot more of this because of guys like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson before the massage scandal. Guys coming on really strong as franchise quarterbacks right away. We're seeing an impatience in the league. And I just want to pump the brakes a little bit on the impatience. If we look at Drew Lock hasn't been the shining example of productivity. He's missed 13 games in his career with thumb sprains, rotator cuff strains. He only had 3 games within the top 10 at the position in his 18 starts that he's had in his career. He's got loaded weapons around him, and there's some sneaky optimism for me. If you look at milehighsports.com, Doug Otwell put out a great article that kind of highlighted the ways that Josh Allen and Drew Lock, through their first 15 games, the numbers are almost identical. If you look, record for both of those guys in the first 15 games was 8-7 as a starter. Completion percentage, Allen had 55%. Lock actually 59%. Yards per attempt, both at 6.7 yards. But check this out. Touchdown to interception ratio, Allen had 13-18 touchdowns to interceptions. Lock 20-16. The passer rating, Lock 79 to Josh Allen 68. So there's some writing on the wall here that if you can try to invest, basically what this tells me, Johnny, and we won't spend too long on this because this isn't, this is a fantasy show, but I want to give some optimism for not only Lock but the weapons around him, right? If you look at this and you say Drew Lock is a guy that can make the Josh Allen leap. Now, look, Josh Allen got Stephon Diggs. He got things in his way that actually helped him. Brian Dable, they redid the offensive line. But Denver is trying, and they have put guys around him, multiple wide receivers, a tight end that's really good. We're going to talk about the running back situation and all that stuff as well. I think that there's a situation where Locke can stand to benefit in a great way, and then the rest of these guys stand to benefit as well.
Yeah, I certainly think, we'll talk about Cortland Sutton and some of the wide receiver weapons a little bit later. But you talk about from a weapon standpoint, he definitely has that. To me, he reminds me a lot of Jay Cutler. And so I get a little bit nervous because what's the upside of Jay Cutler? Jay Cutler had I think one top 5 season. So there is a path that he has the wide receiver weapons around it. The offense could lead to that for sure. Would it surprise me if he cracked the top 12? No, not at all, because he does have the weapons. However, I am a little concerned with some of the things that I do see. But I also am, like you said, there are paths to this upside, right? Like 44 carries, he averaged 3.4 carries per game. Talk about like rushing upside, 3 touchdowns on the ground. So there is a little bit of that like sneaky upside. I think it'll be more of a matchup play, like it's going to be a scary thing being like, all right, we're going to play Drew Lock this week in a matchup play. But there were weeks last year you could do it, and there were a couple weeks where we recommended it and he actually ended up producing. So we've seen the upside he can have. And with these weapons, I do think there are going to be weeks that he'll be playable. Now, would I do that for a whole season? I don't know. I think that's a little risky. You're gambling a little too much, but there is a path.
I just want to say that I'm not trying to make this case for Locke as some sort of he's ready to be your starting quarterback in fantasy now. But for me, I think it's more about what he's able to do with the weapons around him. I think it's a situation where it's like we just want him to be able to make the guys around him better, right? So that's what we're all about. So let's get into those guys though that are around him. And Johnny, we're going to start with. We're going to start with Melvin Gordon. So I'm going to just let you take the mic here on Melvin Gordon because he is a guy that we've been up and down on throughout the offseason, and it has to do with Javonte Williams coming in, who we'll get into after. But look, I said a couple weeks ago, Melvin Gordon, because Evan Silva had come out and said that Melvin Gordon could get cut. Evan Silva then retracted that because he's talked to some people around the Broncos. He's probably not going to get cut. How do you feel about Melvin Gordon? All things considered, when the ADP dust settles, what are we looking at with Melvin Gordon?
I honestly think Melvin Gordon will be kind of in that area where we saw David Johnson last year, Travis. Now, for me, I don't know if I'm going. I really liked him before and where his ADP was, but now with them drafting such a high and trading up to draft Williams, which we both liked as a prospect. We do know that they do split time as far as carries. 50-50 is pretty normal for both these guys. We do know Melvin Gordon usually gets the touchdown upside. So if you go with like an upside down draft strategy, I do think Melvin Gordon could be a guy that, it was an RB2 solid for you, maybe that RB3 if he's your third RB, and there could be some potentially a good upside there because obviously they run the ball a lot. So I'm just caught in like a pickle for Melvin Gordon because I don't necessarily hate him because I think he's very, very talented, but I don't love him as much as I did just a few weeks ago before they made the draft pick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think this is going to be an interesting backfield to kind of dissect. We're going to have to really work on if we want either of these guys, because I think there could be a situation where we are looking at these guys as taking away from each other's value. And I don't want that to happen because I want one of these guys to be a guy that can be a bargain. But it looks like we might be able to stay away from some of these guys if possible. Javonte Williams, though, is the one that's interesting to me. Number 35 pick, 5 yards per attempt or more in all 3 seasons at North Carolina. PFF sees him as a bigger Aaron Jones. And we looked at the tape, Johnny. This guy looks good. I think the upside here is in Javonte. You got to hope his ADP stays lower than Melvin Gordon's. And right now he's going as RB28 off the board. And so it's tough to get behind a guy when you just saw a situation where Melvin Gordon was highly undervalued last year, and it looks to be undervalued again this year. But even by his team, who went out and drafted a running back in the second round. So for me, I think Williams is a guy I looked at really hard in Dynasty, and we talked about that. But for redrafts, I think we might be a year away from Javonte Williams really being what we want him to be at that price range, at an RB2 price range. And it's going to be hard to get behind that.
I think depending on what your roster looks like and how you draft, I don't mind the upswing, the stash on Williams. Right. He probably will be a guy, in all honesty, that I probably won't end up drafting a lot of. However, I'll be certainly waiting and like a shark in blood infested waters for the moment when Williams is dropped, and then I will scoop in and grab him off the waiver, because we do know that Melvin Gordon does tend to miss some games. So on average, he plays about 14 games a season. And so I think that could be potentially why they also went out and got another running back, was because they also see that as well. And so when you add those two things together, I do think at some point Williams will be, talked about more heavily as far as this offense and like on a waiver wire show or something like that. But if you don't necessarily believe right away, you can maybe wait, not draft him, and then wait for that person to drop him and then pick him up, because I do think he'll have fantasy relevant weeks for sure.
All right, Johnny, one of our biggest debated topics right now in some of the later rounds or the middle rounds for wide receiver is actually on the same team. Two players going, on the same team, going in the same kind of rounds. Cortland Sutton versus Jerry Judy. We like Sutton. We like Judy. We liked what we saw in flashes out of Judy. Judy just did not catch the ball very well. And this is a guy who was supposed to be one of the best hands coming out of his class. They also had garbage at quarterback for most of last year. Let's say we get a full, healthy Drew Lock. He actually stays decently and can contribute. Is there a world where you like both of these guys? Do you have a preference? What can you tell Whisper Nation about deciding between these two players, or your outlook for the wide receiving core at Denver?
Look, Jerry G has all the tangibles that you could want a fantasy perspective. He's going to be playing in the slot. He has great hands. He runs routes. But and then he also on two receiver sets, he'll be the other wide receiver opposite of a guy like Cortland Sutton. Here's where my issue comes in. My issue is that you saw so many times where Drew Lock wasn't consistent with delivering the ball to Jerry Judy. Now they get in this offseason if they spend more time, on the same page. But we've already seen that rapport with a guy like Cortland Sutton. So for me, when I'm mock drafts and I'm seeing, Cortland Sutton and Jerry Judy come off the board in like the same round, sometimes I've seen Jerry Judy come off the board in front of Cortland Sutton. And I just think that's absolutely absurd. I don't see where Jerry Judy this year will be the alpha one right there. I think it's going to be Cortland Sutton. Now, does Cortland Sutton have some injury concern? Absolutely. But I do think that it is a little bit fluky on how he got those injuries. I do think that you look at some players of his caliber, Keenan Allen is, comes to mind. We'll talk about him a little later on this show. But when you see this time and time again, where you can kind of get these really elite players at a bargain, Travis, because they're coming off of these, injuries, and people are labeling them, early in their careers as injury prone players. And then what have we seen time and time again? They get that corrected. They figure it out. They figure out their body. And then they have very long, productive careers. And so I think that people should get ahead of that. Cortland Sutton is my guy when it comes to the wide receiver I'd want on this team. But Jerry Judy will be fine. I just think that their ADP is too similar for me. And so I probably won't have a lot of Jerry Judy this year. But he should see a good amount of targets. I'm not saying that he's not, but I see him more as an upside, maybe of a low end, a wide receiver too. Where I think Cortland Sutton could be a top 10 wide receiver as long as he stays healthy and things go, a little bit his way with as far as, Drew Lock throwing him the ball and things like that.
Yeah, right now on 4for4 ADP, which is kind of the consensus expert ADP we have out there. Cortland Sutton going at 608 in 12 teams, and then you have Jerry Judy going in the 8th round in 12-team leagues. And I think that's about right. I think, then you get a chance to take a little bit of upside on Jerry Judy should something happen to Sutton again. But I love where Sutton's going. You can get him as your wide receiver 3, basically the 30th wide receiver off the board. You love that upside because this is a guy that could easily demand 25% market share with a healthy quarterback and relationship. Don't forget, Drew Lock loves Cortland Sutton. I mean, he's a guy, and Cortland Sutton himself is a guy who has balled with multiple quarterbacks over his career and multiple crappy quarterbacks over his career. So you like that in your fantasy football prospects. Don't have to dive too deep into Noah Fant. We talked about him on the Keep Trade Cut. He is going so late in drafts right now, similar to where he was going last year, because he just kind of had an injury plague last year. The upside is there, folks. And we just really want to reiterate that you got to plant your flag in some guys. Like Johnny's got a Tyler Higbee take. We like that. We've been talking that up this offseason. We think that's a great one. Noah Fant's another one you could look at. Even Evan Ingram's getting a huge discount just because of all the weapons and his injury history. Worth it back there because these guys are talented, they're athletic, and the tight end is such a dumpster fire. Might as well grab a couple of these guys and see if one of them could be the breakout guy this year. We are big on Noah Fant. We think his talent is there, and there's no reason why you shouldn't, the ADP isn't such that you shouldn't take a look. Let's move on to the AFC champion, Kansas City Chiefs. Johnny, Patrick Mahomes. Look, we could go on and on and on here about Patrick Mahomes. We know how good Patrick Mahomes is. He's going to be the MVP favorite probably for the next 5 years at least. He is fantastic. He is one of the few guys we've been on this mic saying is worth an early quarterback pick because of the way he can tilt the field for you any week. We are going to suggest that you don't take him early. That is not, that goes away from the book. But if you're going to take any quarterback early, this is the guy to take. He's tied to the coach. He's tied to the offensive line, which they completely revamped. So many weapons in that offense that are just top tier. Travis Kelsey, Tyreek Hill. You've got CEH. They've brought in more players. This is something that, it's just a no-brainer. If you're going to go early on quarterback, you go Patrick Mahomes. Johnny, I think where we get into the meat and potatoes of this offense is probably going to be behind the big guys, behind the big three, behind Tyreek Hill, behind Travis Kelsey, behind Mahomes. CEH is a big one, and that second wide receiver is another big question we have to figure out with this offense. So let me start by asking you about CEH. We have now gone through a couple months of our mock drafting, and we really like where CEH's ADP is kind of settled. It's the back end of that second, beginning of the third. We like where he's going. Are you still all in on this CEH bounce back this year? Because they did bring in, they brought in a couple players still to compete, but he's still the guy, I believe, right, with that first round capital.
Yeah, I definitely think that you saw, the rookies being affected. Some of the rookies were affected more than the other rookies as far as last season because they didn't get that full training camp. Travis, I like where CEH is going right now in drafts. If it does start to creep up, then I have some concern, right? Like, I think if we're in that discussion of you're taking him early in that second round, I don't know if I want to do that. Because once again, you're banking in that it's going to happen. When we talk about Pat Mahomes and how good he is and how efficient he is, that's why they throw the ball so much, is because, you look at CH's yards per carry, true yards per carry is 4.3. So that's pretty good. It's pretty solid. Well, we know that Patrick Mahomes on his lowest yards per reception is about 6. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense sometimes to run the ball. However, they want to get back to that. They don't want to put it all on Pat Mahomes. So I do think that they will allow him to get a few more touches per game. I think you'll see him get more involved in this offense because he'll learn it. We have to remember Andy Reid's offenses are pretty complex. And so it doesn't just happen. And the other thing, and the last thing I'll say, Travis, before I kick it over, and
it better be the last thing you'll say, because you told me this all the time where it's going to be the last thing you say. And here we are 3 years later and you're still saying things.
No, I have different last things to say about each player, but when it comes to CEH, a lot of players will look at the situation. They see they get the bias of, everyone was saying he was going to be a top 5 of running back last year. And when that doesn't happen, then everyone gets so fearful and so afraid of investing in that player because they don't want to get burnt again. But oftentimes we see this happen. And if you go back to our last year's video on CEH, Travis, this is we were both on this. We were saying that when you look at Andy Reid and he was being compared to Brian Westbrook, right? That was a big comp. Andy Reid and Brian Westbrook took a couple of years to really get going. Brian Westbrook didn't come out of the gate and be, one of the best fantasy football players that you had on your roster as far as the running back position. It took a couple of years. And so, and I can tell you from year 1 to year 2 was a significant increase in workload and usage. And I could see the same thing happening for CEH. And they did invest high draft capital in him. They passed on guys like DeAndre Swift, like Antonio Gibson.
Mahomes' requests too, as well.
And so I do think that, Travis, we will have a resurgence. Now, do I think he'll be a top 5 running back? I don't, just because how much Patrick Mahomes throws the ball. It's kind of like Josh Allen taking away rushing touchdowns. You got to look at it very similarly. But there'll be a lot of opportunities. He only had 8 goal line carries last year, Travis. I think that could go up.
I don't even need so many of the goal line carries as I need him back working as Damian Williams used to work in the screen game, in those boot wheel outs. That is the stuff that makes this offense go. And that's the stuff that Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and CEH love to do. And so that's a situation where we need to continue to see that role develop. And I think if we're we're going to ask the question about the secondary ancillary pieces for this offense, I think CEH stands a good chance to be that next weapon ahead of other guys that we're going to talk about, because he's a guy with the capital to do that. And I think the passing game work is going to be very, very, we're going to want to keep an eye on it. I want to talk a little bit about those top 2 guys, those top 2 options, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelsey, before I pitch it over to you, to Johnny, because I'm going to give you the hard part, Johnny. I'm going to talk about the guys that are good that we know. I'm going to ask you to tell us who we can invest in beyond them. And so we'll talk about Tyreek Hill. Look, we know why he's being drafted so high. We know why he finished as wide receiver 1, 87 receptions on 135 targets, 15 touchdowns, 17 total touchdowns, 19 receiving touchdowns of 40-plus yards since 2016. That's 9 more than any other player in the league. He's finished as a top 10 wide receiver 3 out of the last 4 years. He's going to be 27 years old. We've talked about how maybe the speed will fall off eventually. I'm not going to bet on it this year at 27. He's definitely in his athletic prime, you would say. And he continues to grow the chemistry that is already so good between him and Pat Mahomes. You're drafting him there. I have no qualms about taking him there if that's your guy. I would prefer, I believe, this year to go RB and then get your wide receivers in 4 to 7, but I'm not going to fault you for taking a guy like Tyreek Hill based on just the offense and the ceiling that he has. Let's talk Travis Kelsey. Most 15-plus yard receptions from the slot since 2018. He is 3rd on that list with 46. Travis Kelsey has 2,639 receiving yards after the catch in his last 5 seasons. That's over 400 more than any other wide receiver or tight end. Travis Kelsey is in the room by himself. We've talked about how maybe Kittle could touch that. We wanted to see that last year. It did not happen. Kelsey resoundingly just said, I'm the man. And that's going to be that way until we see this guy fall off. What I love about him, we've been talking about this, Gronk was this guy that we watched for years dominate the position, but he had the injury risk. Knock on wood, we haven't seen that with Kelsey. Kelsey continues to be a guy that's smart about getting down. He's not a big lumbering guy that's going to fall hard or take gigantic hits. He is literally doing what he has to do to keep in that offense and keep healthy. And I love that about him. And I think you can continue to draft him with confidence as a guy who's going to give you wide receiver numbers at the tight end position. But Johnny, this is what I want Whisper Nation to pay attention to, is your segment here, because Mecole Hardman was a guy we loved last year coming in as a dart throw, as just a guy late in rounds you could take, and hopefully he was going to be a guy that we can invest in and then would pop the ceiling off. It didn't pan out that way, but now we're watching Sammy Watkins leave. We're watching these other guys, Byron Pringle, Demarcus Robinson, just not be guys that can do the same things that Mecole Hardman can do. So how excited are you about Mecole Hardman for 2021?
I don't know why Big Travy over there said we. I didn't know I had a mouse in my pocket last year when I was recording the Mecole Hardman bits. Because you're talking about we.
All right. I definitely was on with you.
You did root for him. I was definitely one of the leading bandwagon components to that last year on Mecole. I did think that he could take that next step, right, and becoming a great weapon for Pat Mahomes. Now, it didn't quite happen that way. Of course, he disappointed. However, this is what I want to talk about. That's so exciting about Mecole Hardman and why I do think he's one of those post-hype sleepers, because now a lot of people aren't on his bandwagon. A lot of people are writing him off. And I think now is a great time to actually go in and get him. And I think you'll get him at a steal because Sammy Watkins is now gone. Now, what does that mean? You know, they do have other wide receivers that would presumably fill that Sammy Watkins role, because he, you know, you're talking about Demarcus Robinson. He actually came in and was like, when Sammy Watkins was not in these games, because he missed 6 games, it was Robinson that actually kind of took over that role. But even still, Travis, that moved up. Because of that moved up Mecole Hardman in that wide receiver class. And so he was able to get on the field still for about 49% of plays. And he saw a 51.3% route participation. And during that time, Travis, he had 638 air yards from Pat Mahomes, which isn't a very significant amount when you're talking about just from, you know, you're looking about everyone in the season during the season. That ranks about 72nd in the league. But Travis, once again, he was in and out of the lineup because that's what Sammy Watkins was in there. With Sammy Watkins out, I definitely see him going up, and with him on the field, we know the speed. Mecole Hardman has yak percentage or yak yards after contact last year was at 7.0, which was 3rd in the league. And so if they put him like in the slot and things like that, you could really start seeing some opportunity open up for a guy like Mecole Hardman. And Travis, he's the guy that I would be taking a stab at, because he runs the deep routes. He has those big play ability, and that's the kind of guy that you want as a stash, because that's the upside play. Whereas the guy that, you know, I'll talk about right now, like, you know, Demarcus Robinson, who played 75% of snaps when Sammy Watkins wasn't there, he just doesn't have any upside, right? You talk about deep targets. He only had 3 of them. You look at Byron Pringle, who the other wide receiver who outsnapped me with 55%, Travis. He only had 181 air yards last year and 3 deep targets as well. So these guys aren't the ones that are going to be pushing the ball down the field. And so when I'm looking at that second wide receiver, I want the explosive one as well.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't want.
Yeah, when you said he doesn't have the upside, I think what you meant is he just doesn't have the same upside because I mean, we've seen it. Sammy Watkins had multiple 3-touchdown games. Like in this offense, your upside is automatically tied to Pat Mahomes, which means you're going to have some upside.
We could step on the field and our upside
exactly.
is
me, I don't know about you, man. I know you got that bum knee. I figure.
Hey, you can still get around. I still got wheels. I can still run a 4.78, dude.
Hey, let's go. I just wanted to say that I think that Robinson will have upside, but the reason we want to talk about, we want to talk about Mecole Hardman over Robinson, over Pringle, is because Mecole Hardman is that mystery box we talk about because he's got so much upside. I wanted to ask you, because towards the end of last year, what we saw with Mecole was, okay, you're not quite ready yet. You're more of Tyreek Hill's handcuff. Should Tyreek Hill miss, they're going to push the ball down the field with you. Do you think this year will give them more of an opportunity? He'll be healthier. He'll be more introduced to the offense to do some of the things you talk about. Get him in the slot. Get him worked around the field. Get him worked as Sammy Watkins-esque in the offense as the second option. Or do you think he actually ends up more in line with behind Tyreek Hill on the depth chart as a guy that's going to come in on limited snaps?
I think they will. What you've seen is he had a struggle with, learning the route tree and picking up the routes. And what you've seen is every single year, Andy Reid has given him a little bit more. And I think his ultimate goal, like Andy Reid's ultimate goal, because how unstoppable would this be, is having both Mecole and Tyreek Hill on opposite sides at the same time on a consistent basis. Because at that point, you don't know who is going to run the deep route or who is going to, go underneath and cut across the field. It's extremely difficult to guard. And I think that's where he ultimately wants to go. And so with that, I think, and I've also been, following some stuff on Twitter with Mecole Hardman. Don't call me, I'm not like psycho or anything. I don't stand outside of his house or anything and hide out in his car or in my car while I watch him at night. But he's been working on his routes, working on his catching. He had a drop problem, 8.1%, Travis, which was, top 10 in the league. That's got to be corrected. And I think he's working on that. So if you can put it all together, you can catch lightning in a bottle. You can get a very good weapon for a Pat Mahomes led offense, and you're not paying much for it. So I like him as a late dart throw.
A few of these guys, have just like the common theme has been post-hype sleeper here. And I think, Mecole Hardman's another one that's going to be post-hype sleeper. Yep. But before we talk the rest of this AFC West, I want to talk to Whisper Nation directly. Whisper Nation, we are nothing without your support. We're so proud of this community we've built with you and me and Johnny and everybody here over at TFW. If you feel it upon your heart to help us continue to grow this family and chase this dream, consider joining us over on Patreon.com. You can show your support at the $5 and $10 levels. And then the Patron benefits, they include access to our exclusive Discord channels, entries to sports card giveaways, increased odds for landing a spot in our 2021 Listener League. We're going to give one of those spots away next week. And bonus fantasy content that is only available for our patrons. Head on over to patreon.com/the Fantasy Whisperers to join the nation today. Johnny, Chargers Nation is really excited about the Chargers this year. They've revamped the offensive line. Herbert, they cut the, Anthony Lynn, who was a stick in the mud, a lot of people believed. Herbert broke the touchdown record, and now he's sitting here as a guy who is being drafted highly among his peers. 4,336 passing yards last year. We mentioned the touchdowns, 31 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. He had some rushing yards in there, 234, 5 rushing touchdowns. Most rookie completions ever, 2020 Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he missed 1 week because he wasn't the starter yet. So we love what we're seeing here out of him, and I think he's valid going where he's going in drafts. You believe that, right? Like this is a guy that's probably going to bounce back, or not bounce back, but continue that trend, or do you think regression's coming in?
Travis, I'm really concerned, and I won't lie to you. And I won't lie to Whisper Nation. I've been really trying to figure out how much I want to make this, one of my things of like going out on a limb here. Cause I actually, not a lot of people are talking about this in our fantasy football, but I am concerned actually when diving a little bit deeper into Herbert and his situation. I am a little concerned that people might get burned this year off of the Herbert hype. We understand what he did at the end of the year. It was fantastic. I thought he looked great. Nothing on Herbert. I thought he was a great quarterback. My problem
you hate him, bro.
I hate him. No, I don't hate him. My problem and my issue is with the coaching staff is coming in, and that's the issue that I have. And the reason I say that is they get Stanley from the LA Rams, right? He was the defensive coordinator as the head coach. So he's going to come in and take over that defensive, the defensive side of the ball. They brought in Joe Lombardi, Travis, as the offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, Lombardi, that name. He's the great-great-grandson or whatever. I don't know which line of the gene pool there it is, but the reason I'm bringing him up is because back in 2014 and 2015 were the only 2 seasons, Travis, in which he was the offensive coordinator for a team. Now, he was the quarterback coach for Drew Brees over the last, 4 years, which is good. He can learn some things from Drew Brees because he's a good quarterback. And so I'm sure he did learn some things. And I'm sure he learned some things from Sean Payton. And I certainly hope he did, because back in 2014, Travis, you had Matthew Stafford throw for 4,000, just a little over 4,000 passing yards. He only had 22 passing touchdowns and he had 12 interceptions. That was under Joe Lombardi. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, if you look at the prior year that Stafford had before Lombardi, Matthew Stafford had very similar numbers to what Herbert has now, and that is Stafford had just over 4,400 yards passing, 29 touchdowns, and 19 interceptions. We just talked about Herbert having around the same passing yards, 31 passing touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And so I think with him coming in, Joe Lombardi, I'm nervous for this offense. The other thing I'm nervous for, we saw Herbert had 5 rushing touchdowns last year. Austin Eckler was a major reason why. We'll talk about Austin Eckler here in just a second. But I think more rushing opportunity will go to Austin Eckler as opposed to Herbert. And so I think from a rushing standpoint, that's also going to come down. And so this is all kind of leading me down the path where I'm seeing caution flags. Now, I don't know how far I want to be like, okay, I'm going to completely stop and turn around and go the other direction, Travis. I don't know if I'm quite there. I still do believe he is a really good quarterback. So I do want to continue to see kind of that. And I do think he has good pieces, but I am concerned. And I do think that there is a very big potential he disappoints people because they're expecting what they saw last year. And I don't think he does that again.
Yeah, this one's tough for me. The big reason I was not in on Herbert after last year, after coming into this year before free agency, was the offensive line. We knew this offensive line had issues, but they fixed that, Johnny, on paper. They fixed that. They went and got Penny Sewell. They got Corey Linsley, made him the highest paid center in the NFL. They got Matt Flair from Pittsburgh. They went out and did work on this line. And so the Lombardi concern could be real. He did decent things with Drew Brees, but that was Drew Brees. But those Saints team were loaded. The Detroit Lions team's not loaded, and up until recently didn't have good offensive lines. So you talk about loaded. We'll talk about that in just a second. Are you foreshadowing? I don't know if you read ahead or not, but I'll bring that up in a second. For me, I think this is one of the most stacked offenses in the league. Just at every position, and I think that's what makes Herbert so interesting. But a 5th round pick, that's where we get a little bit into the shaky ground. Yes. Like if you can get him in the 6th or 7th, fine. But taking Herbert in the 5th before you're taking maybe your 2nd wide receiver or your 3rd wide receiver gets a little bit dicey for me when you can try and get somebody later that's going to put up the same kind of production. And I think we saw last year where Herbert overtook Burrow as the guy to have. I think we might see that flop this year where Burrow is the guy you'd rather take than Herbert because everybody's going to say, oh, Herbert? Everybody's reacting to that. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. Johnny, let's talk a little bit. Austin Eckler, the big speaking of Joe Lombardi, this might be the theme of the Chargers here. Everybody is saying now that Austin Eckler is Alvin Kamara now because that's what Joe Lombardi had over in New Orleans, and that's the whole thing. I don't think you need him to be Alvin Kamara. He's Austin Eckler, and he does Austin Eckler things as it is. So let's get that junk comparison out of here. But how excited are we for Austin Eckler to be healthy this year, be back in this offense, and to have a quarterback like Herbert, moving the chains for him?
I absolutely really, really want Austin Eckler on my fantasy rosters this year. I think, will he have a lot of hype? For sure, because, people have seen what he has done, but he's never put it together, as far as when we know that he's the guy and he puts it together. So for that reason, I think a lot of people are still going to be a little skeptical. I do think Austin Eckler is a different cat. He is his own guy, and I think that you look at some of the similarities. Yeah, they're both really, really efficient. I think that part continues because Travis, let me tell you this. Over the last few seasons, we understand he's missed some games on a points per game basis. So last year when Melvin Gordon or 2 years ago now, when Melvin Gordon was holding out in the 2019 season, Austin Eckler averaged 19.3 fantasy points per game, which was number 2 in the league. Last year, we know that he got injured. He missed a bunch of games, so we can't, we don't want to say, oh, he finished as this running back. You wouldn't get a good picture. On a game-to-game basis, Travis, he had 16.5 fantasy points per game, and which put him at the number 9 ranked running back. So he can be when he plays, he's an RB1. Right now, he's going in the 2nd round. I absolutely think he's a smash on the 2nd round. Now, would I want him as my number 1 running back for my team? I don't know if I would go that far. I think he's a great number 2 running back because I do think the upside. Really? Yeah, exactly. couple more things I'll just say. Average 6.5 of targets per game last year, Travis.
Love that.
And here's the thing, only had 3 total touchdowns last year, 1.8%. That's extremely low. Expect that to get back up, to the 6, 7, maybe 8% range for a running back. He only had 1 goal line carry, Travis, 1 goal line carry last year. And he, on top of all that, this is what I love. He's super consistent. We talk about that 100 mark threshold that we love for Nick Chubb. Austin Eckler averages 93.3 total yards per game last year. That is super solid. If he can even get that up, just even 7 more yards, which I think we both think he could do. You're looking at a guy who's going to be getting you over 100 yards rushing. That's a super solid base. That's 10 fantasy points in most formats minimum. And then you've got, I think the touchdown regression thing is coming. I think he'll take some away, like I had talked about from Herbert. And so I think you could see Austin Eckler, end up with 10 touchdowns and, 1,500 total yards.
Yeah, I think Eckler is a smash, like you said, in the second round. And I love that. I want to talk about Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Jared Cook. Basically, I want to talk about these pass catchers, Johnny, and break this down a little bit for Whisper Nation, because Mike Williams is a guy we have been begging to stay healthy, but just has not done it. Keenan Allen is a guy who's been consistent. We used to beg him to stay healthy, but he's done it. He has now done it. And now we've got Jared Cook, who's a vastly underrated tight end. And I think Jared Cook will be a fine, streamable tight end a lot of weeks. So we don't have to go too deep into that. I don't think you're going to be drafting a ton of Jared Cook. He's definitely going to be a guy you're going to be streaming. But talk to me about Keenan Allen and Herbert and that regression, because you talked about it, you laid it out. You think that there could be some regression there. Does that sprinkle into Keenan Allen? Does that affect Mike Williams? How do you see that shaking out in the pass catchers?
You would tend to believe, based on my argument and how I've been setting it up, right, Travis, that I would lean in that direction and say, hey, this would indicate for me that I'm staying away from a guy like Keenan Allen and a guy like Mike Williams. But I'm actually on the opposite side. Why? Because, when Travis talked about, those Detroit Lions, which he probably would have, in his mind was probably saying, oh, the Detroit Kittens. Well, back in 2014, he was saying, they don't have any weapons. Back in 2014, they had weapons. All right. They had Calvin Johnson and they had Golden Tate. Well, why do I bring those guys up? Well, during that season, even though Matthew Stafford regressed significantly, you still saw both of these wide receivers go over 1,000 yards receiving, Travis. So talking about Keenan Allen, this guy has been, in the beginning, we thought he was labeled a injury-prone player, but ever since those 2 years where he had, the freak injuries of the kidney lacerations, things like that, 3 out of the last 4 years, he's played 16 games. He played 14 last season, Travis. During that time, or during the last year, when you look at his game-to-game breakdown, he finished no lower than wide receiver 14 in PPR. All right, excuse me. Let me retract this whole statement. When you look at those last 4 years, the 3 out of the 4 where he played, at least 14 games, if you look at that entire time, he's finished no lower than receiver 14 in a PPR league, wide receiver 19 in a standard league, and talk about consistency, which we all love from a fantasy perspective. That's what you look for in wide receivers. Last year, Travis, only 2 games where he had over 50% of snaps that he didn't score 10 fantasy points. And one of those weeks was week 1 where he had Tyrod Taylor. So not really a big surprise right there. The other week was week 13 against New England. We know what New England does with their cornerbacks. They have really good cornerbacks. They match them up, take out your best weapon. So you saw that affect Keenan Allen in that way. And I really do like Keenan Allen still. I think people are still sleeping on him because I still think he's a value because he's a wide receiver 1 year in, year out. We've seen multiple quarterbacks now. So I'm back on his train. I think you should draft him. As far as Mike Williams, it's always just been about injury. Like, this guy has all of the prospects that you could possibly want. Like I just said, even though, Matthew Stafford went down, he still had 2 1,000-yard receivers. I do believe Mike Williams could be a 1,000-yard receiver. 5th-year breakout is for a contract year. I'm going to put all my eggs in that basket, Travis. And I have been gobbling up a bunch of Mike Williams in drafts anywhere I can or going out and trying to acquire him on the cheap, because I do think there is a really big chance we see him break out this year.
11th round is where Mike Williams is going, and practically free.
Unbelievable.
Down there. It's really nice. Yeah.
It's criminal.
Yeah, I love it. And Jared Cook's going to be the guy who's going to, if it's not Mike Williams, it would be Jared Cook, I would think, that would get to that 1,000-yard mark, right? And maybe one of the other ancillary wide receivers. You got Josh Palmer coming in as a rookie. But for me, I think it's Mike Williams. He's the big bet. We've talked about how he can do that. Keenan Allen right now, going in the middle of the third round. If he could be your first wide receiver, as wide receiver 10 off the board, you went RB, especially in PPR, Johnny, that's a really, really nice start to your draft.
Yeah.
So
Sign me up.
Loving that. All right, we're going to bring it home with the Las Vegas Raiders.
The Raiders.
Derek Carr first, Johnny. I think, people want to know if Derek Carr can kind of take a little bit of step above that streamable guy and be a guy that you can consistently count on. You could take late in drafts, especially in I think super flex, you're fine taking him as your second quarterback. I think that's where he goes. Is there any hope here for Derek Carr progressing another year in Gruden's system, another year to be, maybe some increased weapons? What is our upside here, if any?
Derek Carr actually surprised me a little bit with how he played last year. He finished as a QB 11 on the year, Travis. And when 27 touchdowns, passing touchdowns, pretty nice. He had over 4,000 passing yards, pretty significant. They didn't have a significant amount of weapons. They did, lose Nelson Aguilar, but they did add John Brown. We'll talk about some of their other wide receiver weapons here in just a second. But, when I'm looking up all the stats on Derek Carr, and I'm actually like, okay, like maybe this guy is one of those guys that you just, if, all your upside guys, get taken in a draft, you can fall back on Derek Carr. I was starting to lean that way. And then I just so happened to look up their schedule, Travis, for the I almost said Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders. And this is their opening schedule. Ravens week 1, Steelers week 2, Dolphins week 3, Chargers week 4, and then Bears week 5. I don't know. I haven't looked at every single schedule for every single team, but it's hard to press that anyone has a more difficult schedule as far as potential number 1 facing defenses or, top 10 facing defenses than Derek Carr does. So I don't know if I would be drafting him, because I think he'll be very, there's not a lot of upside those first 5 weeks. But I do definitely think that there'll be weeks where you're going to watch our show and we'll be saying, all right, stream of the week for the quarterback position is going to be Derek Carr, and he'll be a good play, because there are
and he'll inevitably just suck that week because we picked him to go.
Yeah, most likely. But
no, I love that. I think that we need to realize that what Carr is, call it what it is, and then realize that he's going to be a streamable matchup and
he's
a
winnable
one.
He's a poor man's Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, don't steal my
if there is such a thing.
A poor man's Kirk Cousins. He's already taken a minivan to work, dude. He's already a poor man's Kirk Cousins, dude. All right, I want to talk to running backs real quick, because Josh Jacobs was drafted in the first round a couple years ago by the Raiders. Now the Raiders have brought in Kenyon Drake. Johnny, this has pushed Josh Jacobs down in the ADP, and currently Josh Jacobs is going in the 4th round. And we're starting to get into that dead zone. Remember those old Verizon commercials? They'd be like, "You're in a dead zone." That's what I feel like with that late 3rd round, 4th round with the running backs. We've seen it year over year. If you invest in one of these guys, but that's where Josh Jacobs going. And you're going to get some Josh Jacobs truthers out there that say, look, he's talented. They should use him in the passing game more. That's fine. He is those things, and they should do those things. But they don't want to, and they brought in Kenyon Drake, and they've told us what they want to do. And it wasn't a giant contract, but it wasn't a nothing contract either that they gave Drake. So they gave him significant money. He's not just going to be Jalen Richard. He's going to probably be a little bit better in this offense for them and get a little bit more peeled off of Jacobs' work. Give me your sense of this backfield. Are you skipping Jacobs and then taking a shot at Drake later? Is that your strategy with the Raiders' backfield?
If I'm going in the Raiders backfield direction, that's exactly what I would do. You're looking at, what Josh Jacobs did. Yes, he was great at goal line carries. He had 16, which was 3rd in the league. But Travis, when you're talking about overall touchdowns, he had 12 touchdowns. So third, you're looking at number 4 in the league, 3.9% rate at that. So could he hold that down? Absolutely. If he holds that down, then, you could definitely be seeing some value in Josh Jacobs. Now, do I think that they give him all of that? I don't. I think that that's also why they brought in a guy like Drake, because Drake is also good around the goal line. And I think that they could give some of that workload over to Kenyon, as well as I do expect Kenyon Drake to take the receiving workload from Josh Jacobs as well. There's some weird stuff going on with Josh Jacobs, as far as like, I'm really wondering what the situation is going on there, Travis. It'd be like very interesting to be a fly on the wall if there's like some long-term issues or something that they're worried about with Josh Jacobs, and that's why they keep bringing in these other guys to kind of shoulder the workload, because we have seen the potential there for him to be, a dual threat, but they just don't want to give it to him. And so, like you said, for that reason, I'm going with the cheaper guy. That's just how I roll. But I'll be honest with you, I'm probably going to stay away from both of these guys unless I do that, upside down strategy, or I need like a dart throughout the running back position. I can most certainly tell you I'll be taking more Kenyon Drake than Josh Jacobs, just because, ADP of Kenyon Drake right now, ADP 29, or running back 29 off the board. This guy finished back-to-back seasons as a top 15 running back. And so
I need Jacobs to be pushed down that way. If Jacobs could fall out of the 4th into the 5th and 6th, if I could take a couple more wide receivers with my build, and then I'm taking Josh Jacobs as my 3rd running back as a flex, that's a perfect flex for me, for the guy that's probably going to be their goal line back, going to be the grinder. And we know Gruden loves his grinders. So that's going to be with me. Yeah, knock on wood if you're with me. That's going to be the situation I want to take a look at. Whisper Nation, definitely stick with us on this. Things are evolving with this backfield. We still need to see what coach speak comes out, what happens in training camp and things of that nature. But this is one to definitely be monitoring, because, look, we know that Gruden wants to run. There's going to be some value in trying to figure out if one of these guys is going to take 60% of the market share. It's just hard to project that right now, given Drake's past, the money they gave Drake, and then Jacobs passed with this same team.
That's what you need. If you're a Jacobs, or you want to go after Jacobs, what you need is some of that training camp buzz to come out, to where that running backfield becomes pretty, like no one's really, it's like, oh, is it Drake or is it? And then you get them, relatively, like a round different, or maybe on the same round. And then then it's like, okay, take your gamble. And then it's like, okay, at that point, if you're telling me same draft capital, then it's probably like, I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs, because like we said, he should be the goal line guy. He should get that first and down work. And so, yeah, I think you're better off that way. But if it stays this way, Travis, I don't think I'll be owning any Josh Jacobs.
All right. Well, the real bread and butter, the way this offense has rolled the last couple of years, has been through Darren Waller. If we look at Darren Waller, Johnny, tied with Travis Kelsey for the most targets to a tight end with 145 last year, back-to-back seasons with over 1,000 yards, only 2 games where he got you less than 5 fantasy points, had 4 games where he got you over 18 fantasy points. He is a stud. We've talked about it ad nauseum. We talked about it at the beginning of this show. We know that he's the main vein of this offense, which is crazy. But that's how it goes. We're trying to find out if Henry Ruggs, if Johnny Sleeper, Brian Edwards, if the newly acquired John Brown is going to be the guy to step in here. I have put my flag down that I think that Henry Ruggs is the guy to invest in. That's my take, because I just feel like the draft capital and the way they didn't use him last year speaks to me that they're going to try and implement him. We had the COVID offseason, some weird things. Some of the PFF numbers that have come out have showed that Ruggs had chemistry issues with Derek Carr. I think they get that right this offseason. Johnny, how are you feeling with Brian Edwards, with John Brown around Ruggs? The more we talk about this, the more you've dived into the numbers. Do you still think that Ruggs is not the guy you'd be willing to invest in?
I want to let Whisper Nation know that what you just witnessed on this podcast or heard was Travis is just so eager for us to talk about Ruggs that he just completely hovered over and brushed past the fact that we need to let people know and Whisper Nation know that Darren Waller this year, I'm going to tell you, he will be the number 1 overall tight end. That you need to draft him in every league. If you're thinking about going early tight end, skip Kelsey, skip Kittle, and go for Darren Waller. This offense runs around that guy, and they have done very little to get him even more weapons. He, like we said, 4 games over 18 fantasy points, Travis, from the tight end position is absurd. That is a game changer, and it could go up realistically. Now, when you're talking about these wide receivers, because Travis is excited about Henry Ruggs, and I will let Travis, I am not on the Henry Ruggs bandwagon. I think that will Henry Ruggs have some weeks and games? Absolutely. I think that he does. Obviously, he was the number 1 wide receiver taken because they feel like they want to use him in certain areas. Do I fully think that they know how they want to use him? I don't know that yet. And I'll bring up some stuff when we talk about, John Brown, and why I do think, though, Henry Ruggs will have a better season this year than he did his rookie year. I think he will be more really involved. Yeah, right. I do think he will be more involved. But the guy that I'm planting my flag on as far as like the wide receivers and who I'd want to have, my guy would be Bryan Edwards, because I do think he's taking over that alpha 1 role. I think he will have the X role, and we've seen the X role do produce for fantasy. And so that's where I would go. But I do think there will be weeks where Henry Ruggs does produce for fantasy. So I'm not saying don't draft him, because I do think that, it's good to take a dart throw on him. But I prefer to take my dart throw on Edwards over Ruggs. But Travis, I want to just bring up John Brown, because this point is going to, add to your Henry Ruggs kind of, your Henry Ruggs case, if I should say. So John Brown is coming over, and it's a little bit pondering, right? Because Ruggs and Brown run the very similar routes, right? The very same tree. John Brown is a really good, underrated wide receiver. Now, do I want to go out and invest in that? I wouldn't. I don't think that John Brown, he's a wide receiver 3 flex option on certain matches. That's what I would say. But here's the reason why I think that they brought in a guy like John Brown. If you look at what Henry Ruggs did, right, to make him deserve to be the number 1 overall wide receiver picked, he was averaging 10.1 ADOT at Alabama in 2018. It went up to 11.7 in 2019. His 20-plus air yard rate when it was 15 and 20%. So pretty low relatively. It did go up a little bit. But here's the big thing, Travis. He had 14 screens and 9 screens, and then yards after catch were 8.2 and 10.5. I'm bringing those numbers up because if you look at what he did his rookie year with the Raiders, they had him playing a completely different position than where they drafted for Ruggs and what he was doing at Alabama. They had him running, his ADOT last year was 17.3. They really had him stretching the field, which is what we thought that he could do. And right, 20% or 20 plus air yard rate was at 35%, which was almost double. It was what you add up his years that he had at Alabama. Travis, then you look at the screens that tipped all the way down to only 2 screens for a guy whose yak is so tremendous, and you're not going to give him those opportunities. And then the yards after contact went from 10.5 and 8.2 in college all the way down to 5.7. Now, some people could say, oh, well, that's the NFL. Like, these players are much better. Well, he played in the SEC, and that right there tends to show me a little bit more about John Gruden. They didn't use him in the right way. So I think they want to use him more like he was used in Alabama. And that's why they brought in a guy like John Brown. So John Brown could take the Ruggs role last year. Now they can move Ruggs into the slot, gives him a lot more opportunity. He can get that yak. He'll get that cross over the field crossing routes, which will produce for fantasy. So there, like I said, there will be weeks where he will be a wide receiver 2, maybe as a wide receiver 1 for the week, because he can get touchdowns. He's really fast. But over a long season, I'm still planting my flag into Edwards. I like that, man.
12th round. No, look, I'll just hammer it home here with the fact that Nelson Aguilar and his 82 targets and his massive slot work is now gone off that team. They're not going to put John Brown in the slot, and I doubt they're going to put Bryan Edwards in the slot because they do want him to run as the X wide receiver, as you're saying. That tells me exactly what Johnny just said. They want to use him in screens. They want to use him and get his A-dot more lower down and bubble screens and things of that nature, jet sweeps, stuff like that. They want to use him. That's the bottom line. And first-round draft capital means they should use him. Now, we've seen them take first-round draft capital in Josh Jacobs and go and get Kenyon Drake. So I don't know that it matters if you can assume rational coaching with someone that's irrational like that. But I will say this. I think that Henry Ruggs is going so late in the 12th round and in some of our drafts barely drafted. That is my thing with Henry Ruggs. There is unlimited upside in this guy to
unlimited.
Yes. And I would guarantee, like Charles Barkley likes to say, that Henry Ruggs is going to be at least a wide receiver 3 this year in formats. And I think to get him in the 12th round is a heist. And you guys should be on that. All right. Well, before we go, Whisper Nation, I just want to let you know, look, you could be like those people that get ahead and that's what we do here in fantasy football. You want to get ahead. Well, if you want to get ahead of the competition, get on over to fantasywhispers.com and grab our draft kit today because it's going for only $10. At the end of this month, it's going to go for $15. So get ahead of the competition. And if you're a procrastinator and you wait, well, it's now's the day that you can look inside yourself and make a change. Get on over to fantasywhispers.com, download our draft kit. It's only $10. It's going to go up to $15 at the end of this month. Either way, it's a great price, but you could get ahead of the curve right now and go and get that draft kit. And then you're going to take your fantasy football, team to the moon, baby. #stonks. Johnny.
Diamond
for Johnny Game. Yeah. For Johnny Game Time Hicks, for Big Travy, we're the Fantasy Whispers. We'll see you next time. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, and we're out. Peace.
Right here.
Oh, hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw, go ahead and hit subscribe. And make sure you hit that bell so you get notified anytime we drop new content or go live. And if you're still not sold yet, check out one of these videos.